Hey everyone, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures in Anatomy and Physiology. I'm Professor Long. We're doing these videos because we converted courses from face-to-face to online in the coronavirus shutdown. And these videos are intended for use by my students taking my course at Del Mar College here in Corpus Christi. If anyone else out in YouTube land finds these helpful, great. But I'm focusing them towards what I want my students to know to set the foundations of understanding for anatomy and physiology for their progression through health science programs. Since roughly, an overwhelming majority, I think 100% of the students I polled this semester are health science majors in my Part 2 class. So this video is for my Anatomy and Physiology 2 course, Biology 2402, and this is the first in a series of videos on the urinary system. So if you're in my class, you can begin following along on page 88 of my note set. If you're not in my class, I hope you find this helpful. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about the functions of the urinary system first. It helps to look at the big picture. We're going to do some anatomy of the urinary system. Even though we do that in lab, I want to reiterate a few things to set us up for the next few videos so that we really understand the functioning of the kidneys. Your kidneys keep you alive. All your organs are vital and play major roles in keeping you alive for various reasons. But if your kidneys shut down, your body will slowly poison itself. Because their number one function, the overall function of the kidneys in the urinary system, is to remove toxins from our bloodstream. So kind of a concept that I like to get across to people is, if this is a blood vessel, our cells out in the peripheral tissues will take in things like glucose and other nutrients, amino acids and things, and ions, both positive and negatively charged ions, and things like vitamins and things that we need, and they take all of that stuff out of the bloodstream. They use it for metabolism, for growth and development and healing, and then they dump their waste back into the interstitial fluid. So there's a lot of waste, and that waste sometimes can be toxins. In the last lecture on metabolism, we talked about, or the first two lectures on metabolism, we talked about the formation of amino groups and ammonia and some of those toxins that would literally poison your cells if they're not removed. And there's carbon dioxide and in the form of bicarbonate ions, some CO2. All of that enters back into our bloodstream. Now, as our blood courses around the body, like one giant circle of fluid, if my cells continue to dump waste in there, eventually those wastes will build up. And every time it goes around, we'll build up more waste and more waste. And that is something that we call sepsis. When your blood has gone septic, it's literally your blood is filled with the toxins and wastes that your body has produced. Just like a septic tank at a farm. When you flush the toilet, that's where everything goes. Well, who could survive swimming around or living in a septic tank? You wouldn't. You would be poisoned to death by all the noxious fumes and all the chemicals that can penetrate your body. So when we talk about sepsis in the bloodstream, we're talking about that, the buildup. Now, one of the things that the kidneys do is the kidneys have these special blood vessels that we're going to talk about in more detail. But essentially, we can siphon some of this stuff off a little bit. We run it through a special capillary of blood vessels and then back into our bloodstream. And what happens is we're going to have this little structure that's going to do some filtering. And when we run this dirty blood through, a lot of the toxins and everything are going to be pulled out here. Now, unfortunately, we also, at this filtration membrane called the glomerulus, are going to pull a lot of the good stuff out too. And, the concept is kind of like this, and I hate to use this example, but it's probably the best one that I can get the idea across. If I had a class full of 30 students, and let's say the FBI called me and said, we know 2 students in your class today are intent on doing harm to everyone in the building. It's a dire situation. What we don't want to do is alert and alarm everybody. So we need you to help us get those 2 students, figure out, get them out of the room, remove them so that everybody else can stay in and do all their business. And we're going to set up some detectors down one of the hallways or something. Well, if I told the class, hey, listen, I'm going to pick 2 people, you and you. I need y'all to run down the hallway, run through these detectors for part of an experiment. and you're going to come back later and give us some data. And they did it. If I tell them I'm going to give you some bonus points. Well, if they did it and the FBI arrests them, what if I was wrong on one or both students? What if the bad guys are still in the classroom, so to speak? So it would be better to say, hey, everybody, we're going to do an experiment. We're going to check our blood pressure and our pulse rate or whatever. And then we're all going to run down the hallway and jump through all these hoops. And the hoops are going to beep and do all sorts of crazy stuff. You get down to the end of the hallway, run upstairs, run back downstairs, and come back in the classroom. We're going to check our blood pressure, collect some data, and do an experiment. I'll give everybody bonus points for it. And by the way, as part of the experiment, a couple of people are going to select a few students. They're just going to grab them and pull them off and do some other stuff. And it's all going to make sense in the end. So just bear with me. Well, if we did that, then I would move everybody from the classroom. We all run down the hallway. And then only the good guys get let back in, and the bad guys remain outside the classroom. That's kind of what happens with all of this. The nutrients and the ions and the vitamins and all the beneficial molecules and all the bad stuff, the waste and toxins, get pulled out of our kidneys, run through this structure called a nephron, and while they're going through there, the good stuff gets put back into the bloodstream so that our cells can utilize it, and the bad stuff ends up in our urinary bladder, and then wherever you choose to release that into the external environment. Okay? And that's kind of what the urinary system does. Its number one function is to remove toxins and waste from the body, okay? And it eliminates them through micturition or urination. Another function of it is that in the process, because we're going to be moving fluids and ions, one of the functions of the kidney is that it helps regulate your blood pressure and blood volume. And we're going to see this in some detail. It also helps us maintain and balance out valuable ions and ion concentrations so that we keep the homeostatic range of sodium and potassium and chloride and calcium and all of these ions. So it eliminates toxins and waste from the bloodstream. It helps us regulate blood pressure and blood volume. It helps conserve or at least balance out our ions, our the minerals or the electrolytes. And it also helps regulate or at least conserve our valuable nutrients. So like glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, and glycerol, and all those nutrients that we talked about in digestion and in the last videos on metabolism, we can't lose those. You know, the sad thing is most people on Earth and most animals don't know where their next meal is going to come. So they're starving. If you're lucky enough to be able to take in some nutrition, some food, then your body is designed to lose as little as possible. So, you know, the main functions of the urinary system: eliminate toxins and waste, help regulate blood volume and blood pressure, to maintain the proper concentrations of minerals, electrolytes, ions at the same time. It helps regulate the blood pH with bicarbonate ion and some getting rid of acids. By the way, one of the toxins that we do get rid of, by the way, is a lot of hydrogen ions. They are not good things. We need to get rid of those. So urine is slightly acidic. And it helps conserve the valuable nutrients. So those are the main functions of the urinary system. Now, I want to go over the anatomy of a kidney a little bit. Even though we've done this in lab, we're going to do this again so that you guys can see how the anatomy works with the physiology. I'm going to start with the gross anatomy of the kidney, the larger structures, and blood flow through the kidney, because it's really important how blood flows to the kidney to understand how it helps us filter. So when we look at the kidney, let's say we take the left kidney. This opening here that the vessels and structures enter and exit here is called the hilus or hilum. Okay, and within the kidney, there's a layer near the outside, way out here, called the cortex. The outer covering of the kidney is called the capsule, or they use the term renal for everything. I'm not going to say renal with everything, but you have to do that for lab. But there's the renal capsule, the renal cortex. Cortex means bark or outer covering. The renal capsule would be the equivalent of the visceral peritoneum, but the kidneys are retroperitoneal. They're behind the peritoneal membrane. cavity, so they don't really have a visceral peritoneum. Instead, they have a capsule, a fibrous capsule that covers them. It's some connective tissue. Everything inside here would be called the medulla, or the middle. Okay, within the medulla there are these triangular, they're really not triangular, they're pyramid-shaped structures, and they look like little pyramids. They come to these little points like this, and they all kind of point in the same direction, sort of. And these pyramids are all pointing sort of towards the opening here to some degree. Those pyramids are going to sit on some smaller structures, and those smaller structures are going to be called a calyx, and a bunch of these calyces are going to fuse together and form larger calyces, and then called major calyx, and then that is going to exit the kidney and head off towards the bladder. Now I'm going to enlarge this because I know you can't really see it, but I just wanted to give you a basic breakdown of it. I should have drawn it bigger, but nonetheless, within the medulla, we have areas called columns, the tissue in between the pyramids, and then we have the pyramids. Now here's the concept. Think of a pyramid like a giant funnel. They're really not shaped exactly like a funnel. They're not open on top. But at this end, if I could look at it from this view, it would have a bunch of little tiny holes. So imagine taking something like a funnel and putting a wire screen or mesh over it. And then I prop that funnel up on a little stand that holds it, and stuff would come dripping out of my funnel into this tube. This would be a pyramid. This structure would be called a minor calyx. Okay? Now, if I did this with several pyramids and minor calyces, like this, and then all of these minor calyces, let's just say these three for now, all eventually drip the fluid that they collect into a much larger structure like this. This would be called a major calyx. C-A-L-Y-X. And then, if I took several major calyces, like this one, I'm just going to leave it open on top, but it would have a bunch of minor calyces and pyramids. And if I took all the major calyces, where they all empty into would be an area called the renal pelvis. And then the pelvis will come out and form a structure called the ureter, or some people say ureter, tomato, tomato. So this would be the renal pelvis here. This would be the ureter. Now what happens at the pyramids is that's where urine formation occurs through this unique structure called the nephron. We're going to look at a nephron in detail in a minute. And as each pyramid is collecting urine as it's formed, that urine is going to be rich in toxins and waste and bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions, mostly hydrogen ions. And then it's going to drain from the pyramid into the minor calyces, and then the minor calyces will drain into the major calyces, and then all of the major calyces will meet up at the renal pelvis and drain urine through there, and it goes through ureters to your urinary bladder. The bladder is a very thick-walled structure that is designed to store the toxins until we can eliminate them from the body, so that it doesn't poison other tissues. Now, the kidney itself is not designed to store those toxins. If they stayed in the kidney, it would poison the cells of the kidney. Your kidneys would shut down. So we have to have a continual flow of urine to the bladder. And then when the bladder gets distended, there's a structure that tells us to urinate. We relax some muscles, and it is expressed or expelled or eliminated through the urethra, okay, the tube that takes urine out of the body. Now, that's sort of a broad overview of the major structures of the kidney, okay? Now, let me erase this picture, and I'm going to redraw part of this a little bit bigger. And there's a reason I'm going to do this, because we need to understand blood flow through the kidney. We need to understand the order of that blood will flow through the vessels. There's lots of vessels occurring here. So now, if you take that last image that I had, I'm going to make a giant kidney here. Okay? I'm only going to put a couple of pyramids on this picture because I really need to pay attention to the blood vessels, not so much the pyramids themselves. And this line is not showing up on the video very well. Sorry for that whistling sound or screeching sound, but there you go. So I'm going to put 3 pyramids in here like this. Here's one, here's another, Here's a third one, okay? I'm not going to draw the minor calyces, the major calyces, and all of that. The focus here is the blood flow into the kidney. As you guys know, arteries are red, veins are blue, except for the pulmonaries. They're always reversed. I'm going to use red for my arteries, and I'm going to use blue for the veins. And I'm not even going to get to go through everything yet. We're going to put it all together again in a minute. So the large artery that comes off of your aorta, I'm going to label this a number 1. I'm going to move the end of it over here. This vessel is called the renal artery. And I'm just going to abbreviate artery with an A. The renal artery that comes off of the aorta enters the kidney. As it enters the kidney, it starts to break up, and the branches head off towards the pyramids. So once it branches, the name changes, and all of these branches here are called segmental arteries. As the segmental arteries reach the pyramids, they're going to branch and wrap around the pyramids in 3 dimensions. I'm only going to draw 2 of the branches, but they would be going all the way around. Actually, on one of these, I'll show you what it kind of really looks like. We have arteries going here and here and here and all the way around, almost like a little ring of wires that you could set something in that holds it. And then it would arch over here. Now on this one, I'm only going to draw these first 2, the 2 out here. But those vessels that run along the edges of the pyramid, that go up the sides of the pyramid, are called interlobar arteries. And how we define a lobe of the kidney, because the kidney is divided in lobes, is kind of odd. Between 2 pyramids is an area or bundle of tissue called a renal column. If I divide each renal column in half, then half of a renal column, a pyramid, and the other half of a renal column is called a lobe of the kidney. And then I have another lobe here, another lobe here, and another lobe here. So since these blood vessels run between the lobes, they're called interlobar arteries. When they get to the top of the pyramids, they arch over the top of the pyramids. They all kind of fuse and arch over here. And where they form an arc over the top, they are called an arcuate artery. And then off of the arcuate arteries are going to be all these little branches that look like rays of sunshine radiating out if you drew a picture of the sun, like in kindergarten or something. And so we're going to have all these little vessels out here like this, and those are going to be called cortical radiate arteries because they are in the cortex of the kidney. Okay? So, renal artery, segmental arteries, interlobar arteries, arcuate arteries, cortical radiate arteries. Now, some old textbooks call these interlobular arteries because there's little lobules that we'll talk about, and we're not even going to talk about them, but some people used to call them that. We're going to call them cortical radiate arteries. Now, there's a couple of other vessels that are missing here, and I'm going to fill that information in a minute. But essentially, what's coming in through the renal artery is blood that has all the nutrients and ions and oxygen, but it's got some trash in it. It's got some debris. And as that dirty blood kind of flows in here, it's going to flow from these arteries into another structure called the nephron. Again, we're going to draw this out in a moment. And that's where we're going to clean the blood. We're going to pull all the trash out, put all the good stuff back into the bloodstream, and then the veins are going to run back out and deliver the blood to our inferior vena cava. And then our heart can distribute that deoxygenated blood to the lungs, back to the heart, and feed all of our tissues oxygen and nutrient rich but clean blood. Okay, so now let me draw the veins on this one, and then I'll actually show you what it really looks like. Okay, so we have all these little veins out here where the blood from these is going to flow, and they're not really on separate pyramids. Really, I would have all these veins up here as well, following the same pathway, so to speak. Okay, I'm going to stop that vessel right there for just the time being. But nonetheless, I want to draw it here so we can see it very clearly. These are going to be called cortical radiate veins. And then the cortical radiate veins will drain into arcuate veins, interlobar veins, And the interlobar veins do not fuse into segmental veins. It turns out that each interlobar vein itself is directly connected to the renal vein. So interlobar and renal veins. So those structures that arch over the top of the pyramid that are blue are arcuate veins. And then I have interlobar veins. And then we have the renal vein. There are no segmental veins in the human kidney. So blood would flow from the aorta through the renal artery, segmental arteries, interlobar arteries, arcuate arteries, cortical radiate arteries. It's going to go through some other structures and then enter cortical radiate veins, arcuate veins, interlobar veins, and then to the renal vein, back into the inferior vena cava. You should know the order that blood flows through these structures. Now there is a little connection that goes from these radiate arteries to these radiate veins. So if I had between this radiate artery and this radiate vein, there's actually going to be a little blood vessel, and I'm going to use purple for this. There's going to be a little knot of capillaries. I know you probably can't see that, but maybe you can zoom in on it. And then there's going to be another knot of capillaries, and then it's going to drain into here. So there's actually like 3 little vessels and 2 little capillary knots. Now I did not put those on the list. We have to add those, but I'm going to add those as we see them. Okay. So now I'm going to do one more drawing, and I'm going to try to tie up this first section of the lecture. Okay. And then we'll go on to another lecture in a few minutes. Right. So now imagine this. Imagine if I cut this little section out. I'm going to get the top edge of the pyramid. I'm going to get part of the interlobar and arcuate artery, and I'm going to get some of these radiate arteries and veins. That's going to lead us to one of the most important structures in the kidneys called the nephrons, which are the functional units of the kidneys. The nephrons perform all the functions, which is to eliminate toxins and waste from the blood and filter it, help us regulate blood volume and blood pressure, help conserve the valuable nutrients and ions, help with ion balance, help with pH. So all the functions of the kidney are going to happen in this little area. Got it? So now that you have that information down, I'm going to erase all this, and let's go over the next thing. Okay. So imagine cutting that little piece out, and I'm going to enlarge it so that you guys can see the detail here. And again, this is one of the most important things we're going to cover. You should learn how to draw this and label it. I'll probably have some diagrams on the exam of what's going to happen where in the kidney. So let's say this is the top edge of our pyramid right here. And I'm going to have an interlobar artery, an arcuate artery on either side here. And I'm going to have the veins running next to them. Okay. Coming off of this, I'm going to draw a little bit bigger one so we can see some detail. So I'm going to have these little arteries coming up like this. And this is going to be our cortical radiate artery. The cortical radiate arteries have some blood vessels that come off of them. And they're little capillaries. So these little capillaries are going to be super duper important. They're not capillaries, they're little arterioles, I should say. And the first one that comes off here is going to go in a particular direction. Now these, I'm going to draw them going from left to right. But if I had another cortical radiate artery over here, then I could have one going this way, one going this way, one coming towards me. They wrap all the way around. They're completely enveloping this, but we're just going to draw one nephron here. Okay. This little arteriole comes out, and it's going to form a big network of capillaries, a bunch of interconnected capillaries. And then it's going to come out the other side, and it's going to break up into a bunch of capillaries here, another capillary bed. And as you recall, when we did vessels, capillaries are the only blood vessels that allow anything to enter or exit the bloodstream. And then this capillary bed is going to come back together. And on this one, we're actually going to have a dynamic center. We don't have a dynamic center on this one for a reason, and it's an important one we'll talk about in a little bit. And then I'm going to have my cortical radiate vein coming down, and blood's going to drain through there. So if we were doing the numbering system on our last picture, let's see, renal artery, segmental arteries, interlobar arteries would be that, the arcuate artery, the cortical radiate artery, and then the numbers would have been the cortical radiate vein, the arcuate vein, the interlobar veins, and then the renal vein. Well, we have these other vessels here that are going to connect from one cortical radiate artery to our cortical radiate vein. Each one of these gets a name. So I'm going to write the names off to the side, but this structure here, I'm going to put AA as the abbreviation. AA is going to stand for the afferent arteriole. Afferent arteriole. It's called the afferent because afferent means to carry towards. Blood is going to be flowing up this artery and then through the afferent arteriole towards the capillary bed. Once it hits this capillary bed, I'm going to put a little G over here. That's going to stand for the glomerulus. And I couldn't fit it all in there, sorry. Let me rewrite it. It's called the glomerulus. And some people say glomerulus and some say glomerulus. Tomato, tomato. Okay. Now, as blood flows through the glomerulus, it's going to then enter in this structure called the efferent arteriole. Okay. So the efferent arteriole, and I'm just going to write it out so you see the name. Efferre means to carry away, so the efferent arteriole is going to carry blood away from the glomerulus. Afferent goes into the glomerulus, efferent comes out. The efferent arteriole immediately starts to branch into another network of capillaries. This network of capillaries is called the peritubular capillary. And I'll explain why in just a moment, okay? We're just going to get the anatomy down, and then we're going to go back and redraw this and do some physiology in the next video. So the peritubular capillary bed is a large network of capillaries, and then it's going to end up being a little venule draining into the efferent arteriole. So if we were going to go through our list, and we were going to trace a drop of blood, which is a famous anatomy and physiology question, if we were going to trace a drop of blood through the kidney, it would come in through the renal artery, then the segmental artery, and then we would go through the interlobar artery, the arcuate artery, the cortical radiate artery, the afferent arteriole, then the glomerulus, then the efferent arteriole, through the peritubular capillary, through the venule, then through the cortical radiate vein, the arcuate vein, the interlobar vein, and out the renal vein. So really there's more than 9 structures. We have to add these in there. We have to add the afferent arteriole, the glomerulus, the efferent arteriole, the peritubular capillary, and the venule connecting those. Okay. As blood flows through here, and then it's going to come back out this way, is where we're going to clean it. So the next anatomical structure is what we're going to call what's the remainder of the nephron. So now, if I took a little knot of wire, okay, so I'm going to take this structure here, and I know that current would come in this end, and it's going to go through the wire out the other end. If I could bunch up a whole bunch of this wire like this and make a little knot of it, then I would have the glomerulus. This would be my afferent arteriole on this side. This would be my efferent arteriole where whatever is flowing through here would go. There is actually a structure where the afferent and efferent arteriole come in and out, and it completely encapsulates the glomerulus. But in order to see it, the glomerulus, we cut it open, and I'm going to see the structure kind of here, like my hand and my forearm, but really it would be completely encapsulated by this thing. Well, this structure that encapsulated it gets exactly that name. It wraps around the glomerulus like this, and this structure, I'm going to put BC on here. BC stands for Bowmans capsule. After Dr. Bowman, who first described it. The Bowmans capsule is going to collect the filtrate. We're going to filter all the good stuff and the bad stuff out of our bloodstream here. And we're going to collect it in the Bowmans capsule. It goes from the glomerulus, that capillary, into this space called the capsular space. And then there's an opening or a hole in the bottom of the Bowmans capsule that has a tube that coils up on itself. When something gets all knotted up, we say that it's convoluted. And so this structure here is called the proximal convoluted tubule because it is a tube. That proximal convoluted tubule will eventually come down and then get really narrow and form this big loop, a big horseshoe-shaped structure that dips into the renal pyramid. And some parts of the loop are thick and some parts of the loop are thin. And the fluid flowing through here would get knotted up in another part of the tube that's all convoluted or knotted up. And then it's going to join another structure here. And I'm going to draw like this. And this structure is going to run all the way through to the very tip of the pyramid. And it's actually really a tube that has a hole at the tip of the pyramid where urine would drain out of. So this is our proximal convoluted tubule. This whole structure here is referred to as the nephron loop, or sometimes called the loop. And my marker is starting to die on me, so let me change colors here. I gotta get a new black marker soon. It's called the loop of Henle, H-E-N-L-E. The nephron loop, or the loop of Henle. It's actually divided into two parts. There's the descending limb of the loop of Henle, where the fluid will go down, and there's the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, where this fluid would go back up. And the fluid would then pass through this tube, which is called the distal convoluted tubule. And they're called this, sorry, my penmanship, I'm trying to squeeze everything in this small board. The proximal convoluted tubule is called that because it's closer to this structure, which is called a renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle consists of two structures, and you should know this. The renal corpuscle is the glomerulus plus the Bowmans capsule. Okay, so if I talk about a renal corpuscle, I'm talking about the glomerulus, the capillaries inside, and the Bowmans capsule around it. Okay, the rest of this structure is called the renal tubule because it's a long tube. The renal tubule has really three major parts: the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. Of course, we could say four. We could say the descending and ascending loops of the loop of Henle, or the descending limb and the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. But y'all know that. And some people call these the connecting tubules because everywhere that I drew one of these structures, there's a whole other nephron and glomerulus attached. So that would have another one here, and I would have another afferent arteriole forming another one of these nephrons, and another one, and another one. There are well over 1 million nephrons in one kidney, but we're just drawing this particular one. So the nephron is the renal corpuscle plus the renal tubule. Okay, so let's get this down, and then we're going to stop this video because we have the anatomy, and I'm going to redraw everything again in the next video, and we're going to see what happens here. Okay, so now a renal corpuscle is the glomerulus and the Bowmans capsule. The renal tubule is the proximal convoluted tubule plus the loop of Henle plus the distal convoluted tubule. If I put those two things together, I get a nephron. The nephron is the renal corpuscle plus the renal tubule. And this is the functional unit. This is where we're going to pull the toxins out. And as the good stuff and the bad stuff travels through this tubule, we're going to pull the good stuff out of this tubule and put it back into our bloodstream at the peritubular capillary bed. And the toxins are going to stay in here and never get pulled out. And they're going to end up going through the collecting duct, out the tip of the pyramid through a little opening called a renal papilla, into the minor calyx, into the major calyx, and then into the renal pelvis, into the ureter, into the bladder, through the urethra, and then wherever you release it. So now we kind of have the anatomy down, and we have a picture of what's happening here. Okay. Now I'm going to erase all this. I hope you got it all down. I'm going to leave it up for a second. but you guys can always back up the video and keep watching it. But essentially, we have the anatomy of the kidney down. I want to make one last thing clear before I wrap this video up. So let me erase this, and let me show you how it really kind of looks if we could look at it at a microscopic level. Okay. Now that we know the anatomy of the kidney, the physiology is going to make perfect sense, I hope, when we go over this in my next lecture. One of my red markers is not erasing very well, so I'm going to have to switch that out and find a new black marker. I got tons of markers, so I'll get that figured out before the next video. Okay? Never realized how important markers would be in my life. But anyway, so now, imagine this, okay? If I drew a kidney here like this, and I have a pyramid sitting like this, okay? I'm going to have all these little blood vessels coming in, going around here, doing all this. And I know this is small. I'm going to redraw it larger in a second, okay? You can see sort of how it looks. Now, if I took that pyramid out, and I did a really large pyramid like this, then I'm going to have my renal artery come in. My segmental arteries would go towards that. Then there would be my interlobar arteries, my arcuate arteries, my cortical radiate artery, my afferent arteriole, glomerulus, the peritubular capillary bed, and then I would have the Bowmans capsule would be wrapped around this. My proximal convoluted tubule gets all knotted up, makes a big loop of Henle, gets knotted up at the distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct would be coming down like this. Now I'm going to change the color for just a second. I'm going to use, I don't know, let me use green so that we can see this. I could have another one of these things here. And so this radiate artery would have an afferent arteriole that goes in here, and I would form another capillary bed like this. And they were in 3 dimensions all the way around every one of these. So you can see sort of how all this works. And this collecting duct is going to collect waste, urine, from every one of these nephrons, run it out the renal pyramid, and then sitting over here would be my minor calyx, which would drain into a major calyx, which would eventually drain into the renal pelvis and back out. So I hope you're putting all that anatomy together and you're seeing it, how it all works. The next video, I'm going to go in and redraw the nephron, and we're going to see what's happening where in the nephron. That's going to be a majority of the information that you need to know. You need to know the anatomy. I'm going to ask you about blood flow through. I'm going to ask you about what makes up a renal corpuscle, what makes up the nephron, what makes up the renal tubule, and all of that stuff. Okay. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you had as much fun as I did, because I always have a blast with this stuff. And I hope to see you on the flip side so that you guys can watch the next video.